In today's episode of the podcast, I want to talk about the topic of reverse dieting, something that we have touched on in previous episodes of the podcast, but it's one of those ones that keeps coming around and around again. Maybe because people are confused, maybe because you've heard people across the internet say that they've increased their metabolism, they've got these crazy results where they've gone from dieting on very, very low calories to reverse dieting. They're on much, much higher calories, they're still losing weight, they look amazing, they've got body composition goals to die for, and therefore you kind of revisit this process of reverse dieting. Should it be something that you think about in terms of what to do when the dieting phase is over? Or is it a little bit of overblown hyperbole that you can kind of lock away in that box of, yeah, it's nice, but maybe it's not going to be the be all and end all when it comes to my nutrition? That's what we're going to be talking about. So let's get into it right about now. The thing with reverse dieting is that it does have benefits. I will say that from the outset, that I use it with certain clients, and maybe as we go through this podcast, I'll talk about certain client situations where I may and may not want to use a reverse dieting approach. So it does have validity. It does have a mechanism, it does have a reason why you might want to go and use it within your nutrition. But it may be also this thing as well, you don't have to reverse diet. It's not something you need to do. It's not something that's going to revolutionize the way that you manage your nutrition. It's certainly not going to be detrimental if you don't do it either. So what are we talking about when we think about reverse dieting? We should probably clarify the term in and of itself. Well, traditionally, and what we see in terms of popular uses of reverse dieting is whereby when that process of dieting is over, let's say you've achieved the results you wanted to achieve, you've got very, very lean, whatever it is, maybe not very lean, but at least a little bit leaner than when you started because you went on a diet, right? And now the process comes of going back to maintenance calories. You're going back to eating more food because you don't want to be in a calorie deficit, which in and of itself can be a bit of a psychological strain, because maybe like a lot of people, you have been trying to lose weight for months, maybe even years, maybe even decades, maybe even all of your adult life. You feel like you've been on this perpetual diet, you've been on this merry-go-round. So the point at which you actually finally make that breakthrough, you kind of break through and say, yeah, I finally cracked that freaking nut that was holding me back, that was the toughest nut that you couldn't crack for the longest time. You make that breakthrough, you start to lose weight, you start to lose body fat, you maybe even build some muscle along the way, you change your body composition, you kind of look in the mirror, you think that you look great and you feel great, and therefore someone now says, right, okay, dieting's over, let's increase calories. For a lot of people, that can be quite unnerving. You think, shit, dude, I've just spent all of this time getting this right, and now you're telling me to eat more. I don't trust you. I'm going to put the fat back on. Get out of my face, is kind of the reaction a lot of people have. And there is this nervousness, this anxiety, this trepidation about increasing calories. So the reverse dieting process is essentially getting us to that point of maintenance calories. Now, there's two different ways that you can approach getting back to maintenance calories. Now, either of them we're going to calculate basically what those maintenance calories should be. So let's say, for example, you've dropped 10 kilos in the process, you weigh less than you started, obviously. Therefore, your basal metabolic rate, your BMI, your metabolism is going to be slightly lower. That's nothing wrong. That's nothing broken about you. You've not damaged your metabolism. All that's happened there is you weigh less, you take up less mass on the earth, and therefore you need less calories in order to exist. That's all that's happened. Nothing's broken, nothing's damaged. No matter how much you think you haven't damaged things. There's other things and other processes that go on that mean that you might slow down the rate of fat loss and things like that, which you might misconstrue as a damaged metabolism, but that's not essentially the case. So what we do is we calculate maintenance calories based off of where you are at right now. The point at which you have lost weight, you weigh this new weight, whatever that may be, and now we calculate maintenance calories based off of that weight. If for any reason your activity levels have changed since you first started or since you last calculated your calories, take that into consideration, how many workouts you're doing, average step count, things like this that matter. Anything that is going to influence the calories in versus the calories out equation is we want to factor this into our thinking. You can, of course, if you want to, click the link in the show notes and you can use my calorie calculator and make that all process nice and easy for you. Absolutely go do that. Essentially what we then get is this calorie target number, this new number that represents our deficit. The first point to make is that maintenance doesn't exist at one number. If, let's say, for example, maintenance for you is 2,352 calories. If you go 2,353 calories, doesn't mean you're gaining fat. You've got this broad range to work in because there is a lot of variability in the accuracy of food labels, the accuracy of your weighing, the accuracy of the records in MyFitnessPal. There's lots of different variables that are going to go into the process that mean actually you don't have to think about maintenance as being this one number. A bit like if you are approaching a calorie deficit in the right way, and like I would for my clients, would be that we look at a calorie deficit in a range, because having these real fixed post kind of goals to say, well, you can only eat 1,832 calories and anything either side is failure. Well, guess what? Most of the time you're going to fail if that is the way that you're looking at these things. When we think about maintenance, it exists within this range, and it's quite a broad range. And what we then do as well is we think about your weight being in a similar range. Again, it's something that I have a course in the Lean Life Uni, which is my client education platform. It talks about the transition away from tracking. Now, this is going slightly off topic, but I think it's relevant. So when you transition away from tracking, essentially you might do that in a maintenance phase. You might not do it while you're balls deep in a calorie deficit. So when you go and you start to transition away from tracking, you kind of realize that, well, actually my weight is a little bit of a moving feast. It's nothing that is nailed on. I'm not 85.35 kilos every single day. I kind of fluctuate within this range, and that's perfectly normal. And understanding that is a key thing. Now, in that particular course that I refer to that as the maintenance mindset. And the first part of that transition away from tracking that you want to get into, the maintenance mindset to say, well, actually, I know my weight's going to fluctuate. I know my calories can exist in these ranges. That's okay. And let's say weight does increase for a week or two. So what? We know we have the skills to bring it back under control and there's no real issues there. Maintenance becomes a lot more of a fluid process. So the key thing to remember is when you're thinking about reverse dieting is that it's not this one specific number. It's this range. Weight is going to move around. Don't panic about the whole process. So we've got this number, this target number that we're kind of trying to aim for, right? Now, what you could do is just jump straight back up to that number. No issues with that whatsoever. I think that the key thing that people forget is that when we are coming out of a dieting phase, the thing that we want to do is get back to maintenance as quickly as possible, because that is essentially what we are trying to do. There's lots of benefits to not being in a calorie deficit. You could be building more muscle. You could be having more freedom of food choices and so on and so forth. There's lots of benefits to getting straight back up to maintenance and just carrying on with quote unquote normal life. Why would we want to stay in a calorie deficit if we don't have to and if we don't want to? So think about that. Is that a lot of these things, whether it's reverse dieting, whether it's the method you choose for fat loss, we have nuance. We have ability to understand, right? This is my personal situation. These are my personal circumstances. Yes, I've got these broad guidelines. I've got some principles that I need to follow, but there is a lot of ability for you to adjust how you want to approach each and every different situation as you see it in your life, because everyone kind of says you're not a unique snowflake, and you are not a unique snowflake. Energy balance applies to you, but you have unique situations, circumstances, and unique perspective on the world and different lifestyle pressures and things like this. So everybody is slightly different, although not a unique snowflake, let's say. So therefore, you can think about this whole thing by saying, well, what's right for me? It might just be a case of, got my maintenance number, 2,352 calories. Let's jack the calories back up. Let's have a bit more freedom of food choice, and let's just crack on with life. Great, no issue, no problem. However, some people have a little bit of nervousness. Now, we talked about earlier some of the psychological things that people fear. People fear increasing in calories. So sometimes from that perspective, reverse dieting can give that person confidence confidence that increasing calories does not necessarily mean increase in body fat. And those increases in calories and increase in carbohydrate that then start to replenish glycogen and the water weight that comes with that does not mean that your body composition just falls to pieces and the hard work that you've put in over the course of the last few months isn't shot to shit because you ate an apple. You know what I mean? There is this whole kind of reinforcing the fact that, giving people confidence. And again, it might be that you're in that situation. You're in that situation of feeling a little bit of anxiety when it comes to your weight, when it comes to getting out of that dieting phase. So reverse dieting can help in that context. Therefore, what you might want to do now, to give you an example of what I might do with a client. Now, I've working with a client currently who has gone through a dieting phase. Now, their original goal was to build muscle, but there was probably worth some body fat loss in that early part of that process, because as a newbie, we can go through a process of reducing body fat, but also building muscle. And then once we've got a little bit leaner, then we can kind of then transfer that process into making more gains over the long period of time, because there's not necessarily any super benefits about being very, very lean before you start going into a surplus or maintenance. But essentially it comes down to psychological side of things, is that you are, if you're going into a calorie surplus, going to have a increase in body fat to some degree. Now, obviously, if you start from a lower level of body fat, those increases, are maybe you don't notice them as much, or maybe you're not bothered by them as much. And therefore, once you put a little bit of body fat on over a few months, then you can start to stop and maybe go into a calorie deficit. That aside, is that we're now in a process with this particular client of pushing the calories back up. Now, we've stopped shy of going into what we kind of mathematically think is maintenance, mainly because we want to just do this a little bit more conservatively for the fact that we don't want to overshoot maintenance. Because when we calculate calories via a calculator or whatever means that you want to use, it's an estimate. It's an estimate of what we think the maintenance calories, the maintenance range is going to be. Therefore, if we have the opportunity, if we have the time, if we have the right client who wants to approach it in this way, well, we can kind of just say, okay, here's maintenance. Maybe it is that 2,352 or whatever. But let's go a couple of hundred calories short of that. And let's see what happens to your weight, because you might still be in a deficit. You might still be losing weight. You might still be building muscle, but you might have a little bit more freedom. We then can say, okay, well, we understood that that's still a deficit. So let's push the calories another couple of hundred calories and see what happens. And therefore, you don't really run the risk of overshooting maintenance, going to a surplus, and then putting on body fat and getting disheartened with the process. So it adds that little level of control. Now, the other way to reverse diet is one that I rarely do with anybody, but it is probably the most popular version of reverse dieting, which is essentially increasing 50 calories a week or 100 calories a week over the course of a period of time. Some people will tell you, well, you have to do it over the length of time that you dieted for is the length of time you have to reverse diet for. There's no real research to say that that's the case whatsoever, but it might be the way you want to do it. I have never met a person so far that that's the way that is optimal for them. Because when you think about it, let's say, I don't know, apple is like 80 to 90 calories, right? So if I said to you, increase by 50 calories, it's not really anything. You don't feel any change. It feels kind of pointless to increase calories by 50. It's just not really enough to really worth worrying about. You might increase by 100, that's more noticeable. Again, you might want to just say, well, what's right for your situation? Because you might be that person that's a little bit anxious. So if I said to you, right, really, really nervous about increasing calories, really hard push to kind of really buy into this process. So again, I might say to that client, okay, can you include an apple into your current nutrition? Yeah, no problem. Can do that for you, Simon. Cool. That's 80, 90 calories. And sometimes when you revert it to that, in terms of not necessarily thinking about it as in a calorie number, and just a simple food that someone could introduce and say, do you feel like you could eat an extra apple today? And yeah, sure, no problem. Great, cool, do that. And then you can start to maybe introduce other foods that they like, that they enjoy, that they can just have in multiple quantities. Then you're starting to slowly increase the amount of calories they're eating. While you're doing that, you're also monitoring weight. You're showing them through progress pictures and measurements and things like that. that body composition isn't changing here. We're increasing by 100 calories, we're increasing by 200 calories. And sometimes that slower reverse dieting process can help someone get over some of the psychological effects of that they're kind of like deep seated when they've been dieting for so long and trying to lose weight for so long that they kind of get stuck in. That would be kind of one reason why you would do that. Essentially, the reverse dieting process is helping you to control the transition back to maintenance if you don't feel confident in jumping straight back there. Obviously, if you're in one of these reverse diets where you're slowly increasing calories, then by definition, you are still dieting. Because let's say that you were in a calorie deficit of 500 calories. If you increase your calories by 100, you're still in a 400 calorie deficit. You're still losing body fat. You're still progressing with your diet. You increase again, maybe a couple of weeks later, you're still in a 300 calorie deficit, and so on and so forth. So you're still in this dieting phase while you're going through reverse dieting. And that's why somebody who you see in a progress picture and something like that is, okay, they were starting on, I don't know, let's say 1,300 calories or something like that. Now they're at 1,500 calories and they're still losing body fat. Well, okay, because they're still in a calorie deficit. That's the reason why that's happening. And even though we would go through that reverse dieting process, well, you can still lose body fat whilst you increase calories. And that might appeal to you. You might be someone who says, well, do you know what? That actually sounds quite fucking good. That I've kind of come to the end of that dieting phase, but maybe I want to lose a little bit more. And if I do a reverse diet for, I don't know, 8 weeks or something like that, 10 weeks, I don't know, whatever number you want to pick, it's kind of arbitrary. But over the course of those 8 to 10 weeks, then I'm still losing body fat because I'm in a calorie deficit. I've not hit my maintenance point yet. So that might appeal to you to say, well, actually, am I getting the best of both worlds here? Am I losing a little bit more body fat, but also starting to increase calories and getting some confidence around food? Yes, my weight is kind of fluctuating and going up, but it's under control. Body composition is still there. I'm not increasing body fat. There are these situations that you might want to consider reverse dieting. So reverse dieting has its place. I would say overall that don't feel like you're hugely missing out if you just jump back straight up to maintenance. I think that the decision on whether to reverse diet or not comes a lot down to the individual circumstances, a lot down to the psychology of the individual and some of the experiences that they may have had in the past, especially if they've been really fucking bad ones when it comes to dieting. And therefore it can kind of give that confidence, that boost to know that shit's going to be all right, you know? A little bit of food here is not going to do us any harm. In fact, it's going to probably make us feel really fucking good about ourselves. So that is my take on when and when not to reverse diet.